So in the last video, I explained the three different types of conversation: social vibing, facts, ideas, and opinions, and emotional connection. So in this video, I'm gonna talk about how you can almost instantly become an expert at carrying on the facts, ideas, and opinions type of conversation. So basically, if you've ever bought my shyness and social anxiety system, or if you've known about my advice for any period of time, then I really hope that you've seen this technique. Basically, what I'm gonna explain to you in this video is a technique I call conversation threading. And when you know how to use this technique, it's gonna allow you to always know what to say next in conversations. At least it's going to allow you to always know what to say next in the more logical type of conversations that involve facts, ideas, and opinions. So in this video, I'm literally just going to go through this report that comes with my shyness and social anxiety system that explains the conversation threading technique. And in fact, if you when you signed up for this program, you should have actually received a free download of this report. So I hope you went through it already, and in this video I'm going to explain to you even more deeply the idea of conversation threading. So in this introduction to the report, I talk about how a lot of people have shyness and social anxiety. They have trouble running out of things to say, creating awkward silences, and sometimes not knowing what to talk about. And people who have shyness or social anxiety, they sometimes wait too long to respond. They overthink their responses. Sometimes when you say something, you don't add anything to the conversation. You might not carry your weight in the conversation, which means you put too much pressure on the other person to do most of the talking. Or worst of all, you might get a blank mind, not say anything, and kill the conversation entirely. So before I get into the actual technique, I make the point here that you need to build the muscle of conversation skills. So I say you get better at talking to people by talking to people, period. This tool, conversation threading, will allow you to get started with one of your biggest issues in the beginning, but it's up to you to take the tools and put them into practice. At first, your progress will probably be slow, and you'll have to put a lot of conscious effort into what you're saying. So basically, if right now you're a person who often runs out of things to say or doesn't know what to say when you're talking to someone you don't know that well, then you'll probably have to really think about using the techniques I'm going to show you a lot. You're going to have to put a lot of effort into your conversations in the beginning. However, as you gain experience and confidence, you'll find yourself naturally picking up on the rhythm or flow of natural conversation, and you'll find that over time you have to think about using the techniques less and less. You'll be more immersed into the topics of a conversation. You'll be more in the conversation instead of trying to come up with what to say next. Finally, one day, after enough practice, you'll reach a point where making conversation will become effortless, and you'll wonder what was such a big deal in the first place. So this is usually how I am when I'm talking to people. Even though I know about the technique of conversation threading, I don't usually use the technique consciously. It's something that's kind of become a part of my social skills, and I think my brain just kind of does it automatically now. So the technique I'm about to show you is simple, but it's ultra effective. Don't be fooled or put off by how easy it is to learn or how short this video is. Conversations aren't complicated, especially when you're talking about facts, ideas, and opinion. People all over the world have billions of conversations every day. So all you need to do is understand some basic but critical points, gain some basic experience, and you too are going to be able to make conversations like a pro. So, conversation threading. This is basically a new framework for conversations. Many shy people get stuck when trying to talk to people because they think of a conversation as being a straight line. They think it's like a railroad track, but it's not true. Conversations rarely follow a logical sequence from beginning to end. Instead, it usually goes in random directions. Have you ever realized that you were talking to somebody you knew about something really weird, and you said, "How did this conversation even start again?" That's because there are many possible paths a conversation can take, depending on which threads you choose to follow. Because of this, it really is possible to keep a conversation going forever, basically, and never run out of things to say. But before you get to that point, you first have to learn what a thread is. So what is a thread? Well, when it comes to conversations, a thread is a single subject, topic, or idea in a sentence. So in a typical sentence, there can be many of these threads or topics. So for example, if I told you the following sentence, Bob made the football team last Saturday, then this is a very basic sentence, but inside of it you can find several threads if you know what to look for. So the threads or topics in this sentence could be Bob, football team, and last Saturday. So, those are the threads in that sentence. And now, once you notice the threads, you can now choose any one of these threads and respond to it in your reply. So for example, if you choose the thread Bob, you could say something like, "I saw Bob last weekend at the mall. He was sitting with his girlfriend at McDonald's." Or if you choose the thread football team, you could say, "I don't know how people can watch football for hours at a time on TV. There's a commercial break every 2 minutes. Basketball is a lot more exciting." Or if you pick the topic or thread of last Saturday, you could say, "Really? I saw Terminator 3 last Saturday with Joe downtown." So threads are basically branches. Another way to think of threads is you can think of each new thread or topic in a sentence as a branch coming off the main conversational tree. Each branch can also branch out into new sub-branches or sub-threads forever. And this is why conversations can last for hours, because with each new sentence that every person says, their sentence usually has 3 to 4 new threads or branches that the conversation could go down into. This is why people can often talk for hours and hours. So here's an example, a diagram showing some of the threads inside of the replies. So here at the top, you can see the original sentence of Bob made the football team last Saturday. And then here, there's branches showing Bob, football team, last Saturday, and you can see the example replies I gave. And then in each example reply, there's new topics in each example reply. So, for example, in the reply to last Saturday, I said, "Really? I saw Star Wars last Saturday with Joe downtown." So in this new reply, there's new topics that the conversation could go down, like Star Wars, Joe, or downtown. See? So conversations really can be endless when you know how to look for and use the threads in each sentence. So why is it so useful to use threads? Why is it so useful to notice these topics and, say something about the topic in the other person's sentence? Well, the reason why threaded replies are good is because they are on topic and they logically flow with the conversational subject. So if the other person said, Bob made the football team last Saturday, and you said something completely random, like, "Oh, I want to go visit Montreal tomorrow," that has nothing to do with what the other person just said. But if you pick one part of what he said and then you say something about it, it logically flows with the conversation. It's on topic. It works. The second reason why threaded replies are good is because they give the other person something to reply to, and they keep the conversation going because you actually have something real to say. You don't want to, for example, pick the topic Bob here and simply say, oh, Bob is a good guy, because that doesn't introduce any new topics or new threads for the other person to keep going, right? So all the replies that I gave you in my example contain new threads that the other person can easily reply to, and I'll show you how to do this in just a few paragraphs. So what's the step-by-step directions? I hope you kind of understand the general idea of conversation threading so far, and you probably now know how powerful this technique is. So now that you know what threads are and how they work, how exactly do you use this technique in everyday conversations? Well, there's only a couple basic steps. Step 1 is you need to actively listen for threads. So whenever someone talks to you, you have to listen to what they're saying very carefully. If it's not a question, then there's probably a few different threads in what they said that you can pick to comment on. And at first, you may be kind of bad at this, but soon you'll find it very easy to pick out the main subjects or threads almost instantly. And in fact, after a while, you won't even need to listen for threads anymore, because you'll kind of pay attention to these threads almost subconsciously. So in a way, conversational threading teaches you a new way of talking. And the second step, you have to always introduce new threads. This means that you don't want to let the other person do all of the talking. A lot of shy people, they sometimes hear the advice that you should ask the other person questions, and they use that advice as a crutch. And usually, if you don't contribute anything to the conversation, it's often boring for both of you. You shouldn't put the burden of conversation on the other person. You also have to contribute. So how do you do this? Well, you do it by making sure your replies have their own new threads. So for example, if someone says to you, Bob made the football team last Saturday, here's a bad reply. A bad reply is something like, yeah, Bob is pretty good at football, because you didn't add any new threads to it, right? You didn't really say anything, and it doesn't give the other person anything new to comment on or talking about, which makes it harder for them to continue the conversation. On the other hand, here's a much better reply where you introduce new threads into the conversation. A much better reply is I saw Bob last weekend at the mall. He was sitting with his girlfriend at McDonald's. So here you see there's new threads of last weekend, the mall, his girlfriend, and McDonald's. You should try to include at least 2, maybe 3 new threads every time you talk in conversation. Basically, you want to give the other person several paths that they can choose to follow in their reply to you. All right, so in summary of this report, what is conversation threading? Well, a thread is a single idea like Joe or treehouse in a piece of conversation. You can think of threads like branches on a tree. There are many possible paths that you can choose to go down in a conversation, but usually you can only pick one whenever you talk. The reason why threads are good, the reason why this technique is good to follow, is because your replies are going to be on topic and you're going to logically flow with what the other person has just said. And by following my tip to always add new threads whenever you talk, it helps you to actually add to a conversation. You finally have something real to say. And threads mimic how real people have conversations. It's an easy way to retrain your brain to make it think about conversation the way that outgoing people do. And the 3-step method for threading in real life is you want to actively listen for threads. So basically just look for those subject words that you can then comment on, and you'll start to automatically do this after a while. And then the next step is to always introduce new threads. Make sure your replies include their own subject words. That's what makes you an interesting talker, and it keeps the conversation going. It also makes it easy for the other person to keep talking to you. And a last tip, which I'm going to talk more about in a different video, is to use statements, not questions. A statement adds value to the conversation. A question takes value away. Often shy people use questions because they don't know what to say, so they're trying to rely on getting the other person to talk a lot. And a question puts the burden of conversation on the other person, which is something that you don't want to do. You want to become more talkative. You want to become better at talking. You don't want to use questions as a crutch. And in a later video in this module, I'll talk more about statements, and I'll talk more about the right types of questions to use in conversations. So in conclusion, I hope conversation threading improves your life. The real power behind conversation threading is that there are no lines to memorize. I'm not telling you exactly what words or lines they should say. Conversation threading is just a framework that you follow, and it helps you to relate to people through your own experiences and knowledge. So by reading this report, you should now understand that it's impossible to memorize the perfect thing to say in every possible situations. Conversations are interesting because no two conversations are alike, right? You never know what the other person is really going to say. You don't know where the new topics or the new threads will take you next. So it's not about memorizing the perfect thing to say, but changing your core habits and behaviors so that you naturally think and act like an outgoing person. And like I mentioned before, when you're a complete beginner at having conversations, when you're someone like I was back when I had really bad social anxiety, back when I was extremely shy, I could barely talk to anybody, as in, even people at school, I couldn't carry on a basic conversation. So if you're at that level, then this technique is extremely useful because as a beginner, it gives you a very detailed framework to follow when you're making conversations. But over time, as you become more social, as your social skills become more natural, this type of technique will become more natural to you, and you won't even have to think about using it anymore. So think of conversation threading like using training wheels on a bike. Over time, as you practice, you outgrow the training wheels. You don't need them anymore. So your focus will naturally shift over time from, consciously needing to pick out topics and threads and statements, and instead you're mostly just going to focus on being totally immersed and into the subject of conversation. And the moment you make that shift is the moment you'll be able to have natural, effortless conversations without worrying about what to say. So conversation threading is the most useful in when you're talking about facts, ideas, and opinions, because it is kind of like a logical way to make conversations. So if you ever had problems with running out of things to say when you're talking to someone about facts, ideas, or opinions, then this technique should basically permanently solve most of your issues. And later in this program, I'll be talking more about how you can get good at the other elements or types of conversation, which is vibing and emotional connection. So if you've heard me explain this technique to you before, I hope this video gave you a good refresh. If you haven't ever used this technique before, I'm sure you're going to be amazed at how easy it makes it to carry conversations. Now go out there and get some practice. The sooner you start, the sooner you'll master conversation threading, and you'll always know what to say next, at least when it comes to facts, ideas, and opinions.